One of the most amazing migratory birds you will ever encounter are the Sandhill Cranes. And they migrate through the central part of the country up around Nebraska, the Platte River area by the hundreds of thousands. But here in Kentucky we have a smaller population, somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000 that come through here every season. And they'll spend most of the winter right here at Barren River Lake. And that's where we are today. And we're going to spend a good part of this day chasing these absolutely amazing, fascinating birds. So come and join me. Step beyond the campfire as we chase sandhill cranes.
Let's talk a few minutes about how to actually photograph these sandhill cranes. They are a challenge at times. They can be very leery, very jumpy around people. So you're not going to walk in on them. Oddly enough, probably the easiest and best way to start photographing them is from just inside your car. The odds are that they're going to land, you're going to find some anyway, not too far from the road. And that'll vary depending on the circumstances, depending on the day and their activity. But they'll be in close enough sometimes where you can actually get some pretty decent photographs just staying in your car. On a cold, windy, blustery day like today, it's a lot nicer being in your car than it is standing out in that cold air. You're also going to want to use some type of a long telephoto lens. Something in a 400 to 500 millimeter range is pretty ideal. A 600 is even better, but in a pinch you can use a 200 or a 300. This just kind of depends on the circumstances. As far as exposure goes, they're kind of a neutral gray color, and the fields that you're going to find them in are rather neutral values as well. So if you just sort of kind of allow your camera to do what it wants to do, you're probably going to get reasonably accurate exposure on them. You can pretty well trust what your camera wants to do. Now where it gets tricky is when you want to try to photograph them as they're flying, especially on an overcast day like today where you have this sort of a flat gray sky. Because to the camera that gray sky is pretty bright. And it's going to want to fool your exposure value, your exposure meter, into thinking that it needs to shift your exposure in such a way that it's going to cause the birds to look almost like a silhouette, and you're not going to see a lot of detail in them. So the way to get around that is to use your exposure compensation, and that's to add value by moving your exposure compensation up into a plus value range. It's that little plus or minus button on your camera. You move it up to like a 0.3 or a 0.7, and possibly even as high as a 1.0, a full stop increment. And that's going to give you more detail in the birds as you're photographing them against a kind of a bright gray sky like we have today. Now, when you're photographing these birds, especially when they're on the ground, the idea is to capture them doing what they do naturally. It's some kind of a natural action or habitat type of performance that they put on. If they're just standing there kind of looking around, sure, you can take little portraits of them, but after a while they all begin to look the same. So the idea is to have a little patience and watch them, and they'll begin to flap their wings. They like to dance. They'll jump up and down. They tend to congregate in small family groups, and when they come together, they'll greet each other. They'll go through this little up and down dance, and they'll flap their wings. Sometimes they get into little squabbles. They'll start poking and flapping, to try to settle the squabble. So the idea here is to not just always take portraits of them standing in the field, but to capture them in such a way that you capture their natural actions, their natural habitat. Well, it's been quite a day chasing these sand hills. It's been cold, it's been a little blustery, but it's sure been worth it being out. Saw quite a few birds, not as many as I'd like, maybe 300 to 400 all total. But it's been a good time. Thanks for joining us beyond the campfire. We're coming back out. We're going to do this again. We'll see you then.